Should I put some sunnies on? I feel like I should put some sunnies on. Oh yeah. The Star Wars sequel trilogy. Possibly one of the most contested parts of the Star Wars franchise as a whole. Lots of people absolutely despise it with every fiber of their being. But then there are a minority of people who actually really like these films and really do enjoy them. I'm here today to talk about the good, the bad, and the overwhelmingly mediocre of these films to see, you know, who here is in the right, who is in the wrong, is there anyone in the right or wrong? Can we just enjoy what we want to enjoy and hate what we want to hate? It's up to you. Hi, I am Diggs, and hopefully this video will be shorter than my first one, which went for an hour. It was something. Anyway, as already stated, I want to talk about the sequel trilogy and where it kind of went wrong, for want of a better word. A lot of people, as I previously mentioned, really hate these movies to a visceral extent, whereas a lot of people do actually really like them. And I kind of want to explore what objectively good things these movies did and what objectively bad things they did, as well as the kind of middle areas where it's kind of less sure. Anyway, personally, I can't say that I am a hater or a fan of these movies, which is why I think it might be a good idea for a more neutral stance to be put into this space for once, because every other review video I see of these movies is either absolutely just trashing it with almost no consideration for the good parts of these films, or glazing it and kind of almost being biased towards it. I also think that a lot of people will make the argument of like, you can't say anything bad about these movies because people will come after you and be like, you're a sexist. I'm not here to do that. A lot of people say that, you know, the arguments made against the movies are often laced with racism and sexism, which personally, there are some where I see a lot of rooted bigotry within these arguments. But today I want to talk about exclusively the objective arguments against this film, not anything to do with the rather poor choices made surrounding the characters. A lot of people really dislike these, and I think a lot of that hatred is not founded, but also a fair chunk of it is. So I just want to weigh in my opinion, and I want you to have your own opinion by the end. Not based on mine, not based on the thousands of other reviews that are out there, purely based in what you think and what you believe based off of the conclusions that are drawn in this, alright? Because too many people just go with whatever someone else says. And I think that really we need to just weigh in all of the different things that are good and bad about this movie and think it through before we instantly go into hate mode. If I miss anything in this video, please do tell me. Please be nice to people in the comments. It's no good ruining someone's mental health over something as minuscule as an argument over 3 movies, you know? Anyway, without further ado, I hope you enjoyed. Alright, first we're going to talk about the good things in these films. So, to start, these films, regardless of if you hate them or love them, the cinematography in these films is very good. It is outstanding. There is a reason that they won several awards. Now, obviously some people complain that some of the stunts and the fighting were iffy, but we'll talk more about the iffy part later. A lot of the choreography for this was very well done. They, you know, trained the actors with kendo sticks, I believe, which was very creative. And I personally don't mind watching the fights. Obviously, they kind of pale in comparison to a lot of the ones in the prequels, because those are big, flashy fights, very choreographed, and also they're meant to represent the kind of power of the Jedi Order. Whereas we are now looking at a Jedi Order that doesn't really exist anymore, you know, it's crumbled after Luke's mistake, which again, we will touch on more later. The choreography doesn't look as professional as it did in the prequels, but I think this is in part because of the kind of rawness of this new fighting style. It's not something that has been refined over years and years and years, like it was in the prequels with the Jedi there. And it's kind of like, in the originals, while brilliant, of course, as the first movies, the fighting there wasn't as, flashy and entertaining. The choreography was good, but it wasn't necessarily as impressive as the stuff in the prequels. The same goes here. It is after this very refined fighting style. They had, I believe, 7 different fighting styles within the lightsaber combat. They don't really have that anymore because that information is lost when the Sith burn everything down. So it does kind of make sense for the combat to be less flashy. Anyway, moving on. In The Force Awakens, the first movie, it actually did have a fairly solid storyline built up. While it had its cracks, it was still a solid starting movie. It wasn't perfect by any means, but it had set up a lot to lead into the next film, which is something that isn't really repeated in the next few movies, unfortunately, but we will touch on that later. The first movie is very much shaky, but that's okay. The first movie in each of the trilogies is kind of that building block. It's that starting point where it feels a little bit awkward, but it's still solid. The Force Awakens, personally, to me, is a good movie. I would watch that and you wouldn't have to pay me to do it, But there are parts of it that obviously feel a little bit iffy. Overall though, a good movie. There is pretty good humor, across the whole franchise, there is fairly good humor. It is obviously targeted at a younger audience, which I think is what kind of pisses a lot of people off. I mean, in The Last Jedi, Poe makes a your mother joke. He makes a your mum joke in Star Wars. I think that's kind of funny. But a lot of people complained that it was immature humor. But the jokes in these movies are funny most of the time. There's some bits that don't quite land, but that's gonna happen in every movie. Overall, I think that a lot of parts of these movies are pretty good. I mean, the set design and the costume design and the sound design and visually, these movies are incredible. Visually, stunning. Most of the problems in these movies come in the writing and the actual story of them. Whereas, as a whole, I mean, the cinematography is stunning. It's gorgeous. Again, like I said earlier, it has won several awards for a reason. I mean, it looks a little funny in that red room with Snoke, when they're fighting, and there was the scene with, the 2 guards that started fighting each other that everyone threw a fit about. I mean, a lot of people wouldn't spot that unless they were looking for it. I think I would have been 10 when I saw it, and I did spot that. But, visually, it looks appealing, and if you're not nitpicky like I am, you will barely even notice any issues that are in the background with it. I think that a lot of people who come after it can be a little bit dramatic about it. But overall, I think that there are a lot of good things about these movies. I mean, the characters, a lot of them are fun, with some little hiccups here and there, which again, I will talk about later. But overall, they're not terrible movies. They aren't. The first movie is good. The second movie is good in parts. Personally, the C plot of The Last Jedi, where Poe constructs a mutiny against General Holdo, that is very entertaining. Personally, if that was the A plot of the movie, if that was an overarching thing, I think that would be brilliant. Because the thing is, the A and B plots of that movie aren't the most entertaining. I feel like the focus was very much on the overarching Jedi of the movie, It was very focused on the storyline that honestly was kind of meh. Canto Bight, for example, that storyline was odd. It didn't feel like it fit. And obviously they were trying to do the thing that The Empire Strikes Back did, where they had 2 split stories because the group had split up. But once you split it into 3 groups, it starts to get messy, which is what happened. If they had maybe had Poe and the other two on board with Holdo kind of performing the mutiny there, or they had Poe going off, it doesn't matter. Regardless, there was too much going on in that movie and it just began to feel jumbled. But if it had been able to focus in on one or two primary storylines, I think that would have really helped things. The Rise of Skywalker, I will talk about in the next section. Okay, moving on. We will now talk about the bad. So one huge complaint that so many people make is that the sequels completely mischaracterized Luke Skywalker. And personally, I have to agree with the wonderful Sam Witwer on this. It is kind of explained why Luke is like this, but they miss out on actually explaining why he has become who he is. It's very hard when you leave off from a character like Luke who literally sees like one of the toughest Sith Lords in the entire galaxy and is like, I can change him, I can make him better. And then to have that stark jump to, my nephew has had a single dark thought, he has to die, he has to go. You can't have that jump without it being awkward. It doesn't work to just kind of have the character suddenly turn into a very different character. As Sam Witwer, the lovely voice actor, said, it doesn't work to have a character just suddenly transition into a very different character. Having that big of a change with almost no connections to that original Luke that we saw is stark. It doesn't work, and it means that a lot of people will feel as though he's been mischaracterized, where, again, we don't get to see that growth. That could very well be a completely reasonable thing for him in his mind to do, but we don't know why he thinks it's a reasonable thing to do. We aren't given that growth throughout. We just see what he is now without any reasoning for why that would have happened. It seems sudden, and that's why a lot of people criticize it, because it doesn't feel right. It would have, again, been solved if they had, at the very least, shown a vague transition into this sudden violence. But they didn't, and so it feels janky and awkward. So, the big kicker for these movies, I think, is the fact that there was a real disconnect with all of the directors. These movies had so much trouble with the directors. They were originally actually set to have 3 directors, but they instead had J.J. Abrams for The Force Awakens, who set up the foundation for the whole trilogy. He basically started everything. But then they switched to Rian Johnson for the second one, who ultimately, I think, didn't really consider the first or the third movie. He worried about his own movie as it is by itself, which is where a lot of the problems arise, because The Last Jedi did a pretty bad job of setting up for the movie after it, in The Rise of Skywalker. The movies feel very disconnected from each other because each of them is so different from the last because of this switching of directors. You had J.J. Abrams, Rian Johnson, J.J. Abrams again. It's different directorial styles, and it's also different stories because they'd had different writers on each. The problem is, The Last Jedi, as a second movie, doesn't really work. The thing is, it does a good job at leaving a couple loose ends, but not enough to lead into a third movie. To review, at the end of The Last Jedi, we have defeated Snoke. The rebels got away from the Empire, and things are starting to look up a little bit. They've just had a huge defeat, but they got away. It's strange because they still have that kind of residual, like, what now? Because they just got away from the big bad guys, but they lost a lot. Whereas it also leaves a lot of loose ends, like Phasma, for one. The one thing that I will never get over is how robbed we were of having the big mystery around Phasma. Because that was so well set up to be some big reveal about some crazy thing about Phasma, like perhaps being some like long lost relative of someone in the Resistance or something crazy like that. People were theorizing like crazy. And then we didn't really get that. Everyone felt a bit cheated, I think. But back to the actual problems with the end of The Last Jedi, it had just killed off its big villain in the second movie. That's not something that you would usually do. Snoke was being set up from the start to be the big villain. He didn't have a whole lot of screen time in the first movie. He then had a little bit more in the second, and it would have then made sense for him to defeat the Resistance. It would have made sense for the Resistance to suffer this huge, great defeat at the hands of the First Order. It doesn't make sense to have the big villain of the trilogy be killed off in the second movie. It doesn't leave much in the way of a villain. I mean, they left Kylo Ren, obviously, and Hux as well. They left the both of them as almost a setup for another villain. There were too many loose ends, but also not enough. There just wasn't the foundations to build another movie off of that. Luke had just died. It's this big swamp of like misery and sadness and loss, but it's not a big enough loss that it feels right, you know? Like, it's a victory, they've killed Snoke, but they've lost so much that it kind of feels wrong. And then they don't really have that foundation, especially without a main villain, to do another movie. I think really that's why The Rise of Skywalker went so wrong, is that they didn't have another villain to use. Because, I mean, they were probably always going to have Kylo Ren turn to the light side. And honestly, I think it would have been so interesting to explore Hux as a villain. Like, bringing back in Palpatine was such a poor choice. Not just because, you know, it's kind of dumb, but also because it doesn't really make sense story-wise. Poe saying,
"Somehow Palpatine returned,"
is something that is heavily criticized by everyone, and I don't want to continue to peddle that, but it just, bringing Palpatine back from any standpoint isn't a good move. Honestly, I said before, but seeing Hux turn into the major villain of this series would have been incredible. I mean, that speech in The Force Awakens from Hux is incredible. That is one of possibly the best things about that movie, is his speech. It is impassioned. It is like, it's horrifying. Another thing that these movies do so well is making the First Order evil. They do so well at making the big villains of this trilogy so evil. What do we see first thing in The Force Awakens? We see the First Order swooping in. They decimate a whole village of people on Jakku. They shoot them down. Innocent civilians who had nothing to do with what Poe was doing on there as a Resistance pilot. They are pure evil. The speech that Hux gives in The Force Awakens, one of the best things in the whole trilogy. Possibly one of the better things across the whole board for Star Wars. It is incredible. It is chilling. It is, honestly, if you've heard it in other languages as well, it is absolutely horrifying. And watching his eyes glow with that red beam from Starkiller Base as they blow up like 5 planets, that is trillions of people gone like that. These movies, you can hate them all you want, but they do a damn good job of making the First Order pure evil. Arguably, not even arguably, worse than the Empire. They kill people without a second thought, and they just do it. And that is kind of left to rot a bit by the fact that this Rise of Skywalker decided to bring back Palpatine. It's not a good choice to bring back Palpatine and to have the Last Order or whatever it was called be a thing, because it takes away from the pure evil that you have set up from the First Order. The First Order as a whole is a really good villain. It is a really good, really compelling evil to fight against. They blow up planets and kill trillions of innocent people, and yet they still felt the need to bring Palpatine back. Having Hux take over the First Order could have saved the Rise of Skywalker. I know that sounds really dramatic, but honestly, bringing Palpatine back, not only is it a bad choice, but it's also a disservice to the previous films. He is the big bad of those films. It takes a whole 6 movies to get rid of him, and they just bring him back from the dead. The first line in that big scrolling text at the beginning of The Rise of Skywalker is where a lot of people think the pain started. The dead speak. So many people saw that and were like, oh boy. And honestly, I can't disagree with them. My feelings towards the first 2 movies are pretty neutral, you know? Force Awakens, I like it personally. Last Jedi, can't really get behind it. It's not my cup of tea, you know? I think that it needed some work, but The Rise of Skywalker ultimately just isn't good. I try to find reasons to defend it, and I come up dry. And you know that's bad, because I can defend almost any show in Star Wars like my life depends on it. But The Rise of Skywalker, I just can't. Even the people who like the sequels, a lot of them aren't sure on The Rise of Skywalker. Yes, visually it is appealing. The scene where Palpatine electrocutes Rey is visually very cool, but the story of it isn't one that works well. And it's a shame, because from the start, this series had potential. A lot of people say, oh, Finn should have been the Stormtrooper turned Jedi, which I have to agree on, because that would have been incredible. A lot of people, myself included, also have problems with the characterization of the different characters. Rey, for example, gets so much relentless hate, which I can never support, but her character is very two-dimensional. It doesn't have as much depth as a lot of the female characters in the whole franchise really have. I want to like her, I really do. You know, as a feminist myself, I love seeing strong women in movies like this in such a male-dominated space, but that doesn't apply to Rey. She doesn't feel like a strong female character. They got the strong part right, but the female part is iffy because she just doesn't feel like a character to begin with. There's not that much there. Yes, she's a naive girl from Jakku who wants to find her parents, but ultimately she's not really driven by anything. She doesn't have a goal. Her goal is to be a Jedi, but she doesn't have any real reason for it. It feels shallow. Her reason to join the rebellion is because she wants to see her parents. Like, her arc does revolve around self-discovery and wanting to find out who she is, but it feels very shallow for it to just be like, she's Palpatine's granddaughter. Like, I get what they were going for, but it feels wrong. It almost would have been better if it was true that she just kind of existed, like she was just a normal person, which is what they were building up to. To have her be this extremely powerful granddaughter of Palpatine, it, to be quite frank, feels like a self-insert YN fanfiction. And while that's a whole thing, you know, if you want to do that, that's so fine. That is so, like, you go. But like on an industry level, in a huge movie like this, having a character that feels that two-dimensional isn't right. It feels like a disservice to young girls everywhere to have this character that doesn't really have a goal. She's not impassioned as much as she really could be. I want so badly to like her, but I just can't really feel much towards her because you almost don't feel that same sympathy that you feel for Leia and for Padme, who in and of themselves are brutally sexualized by everyone. It's disgusting, but it's like in their aim to create a character that isn't a constantly sexualized, strong woman, they've kind of just created a blank slate. And it upsets me, honestly. Seeing people hate on Rey all the time is awful. And especially seeing people hate on the actors in this makes me so mad, because they tried their best, no doubt about it. They gave it their all. They just weren't given much material to work with. And it's sad. It really is. It's a real shame that Rey and Finn and Rose, and honestly Poe as well, their arcs are just a bit of a non-event. I mean, Finn being a stormtrooper turned Jedi would have been so interesting, but instead he is kind of sidelined. Half his lines are just him yelling, and it's kind of just a shame because his arc doesn't really go anywhere. He's just the goofy guy who joins the group, and they don't really do anything with it. Poe, he is this ace pilot. He is so up himself. If they were to have a arc where he perhaps got told that he wasn't all that, which, I mean, he does get from Holdo, but he has that arc with Holdo. He is told to take it down a peg, and he kind of learns that, but then the mutiny against Holdo goes well, and he's right again, and there's nothing to really take him down. There's no big defeat for him. Obviously, so many people are lost in that fight, but he doesn't really learn. And then by the time of The Rise of Skywalker, he's just been completely sidelined. Suddenly, he's the general and he's doing stuff, but he doesn't really have anything in The Rise of Skywalker. He doesn't have much of a character. He just is there and exists. It's a real shame. And Rose, do not get me started on the absolute criminal, on how criminal their treatment of Rose was. She serves purely as a conduit for other characters, and it is so frustrating because she would have been a very good character to have. I mean, in the other two trilogies, the groups are only really 2 guys and a girl. To have 2 guys and 2 girls and for it to be even would almost be revolutionary, but Rose and Rey don't ever really interact with each other. And it's like, if you're trying to pass the Bechdel test, why did you have to sideline Rose like that? She doesn't even show up in the 3rd movie. Ugh. It makes me so mad because while some people find her annoying, that's no reason for you to basically completely cut her out. It's sad, as well as the fact that just all of the characters don't feel like they have that much structure behind them. It feels like the directors don't know them as well as they do in the other movies. I mean, they don't. It's been this constant handing off between different directors, so there isn't a chance for them to really know these characters well, for them to actually project themselves or project other people around them onto these characters to give them that foundation. A lot of it was left up to the actors, and they did the best they could, but you can't just purely rely on actors to make the characters. While yes, they are there to portray them, you need to write the characters to have depth. And that was missing in these movies, and it's really sad. Unfortunately, the issues with the sequel trilogy kind of outweigh the good parts of it, and I do want to like it because personally I make it a goal to try and like all of Star Wars, you know? There are a lot of shows that I would defend that many people would not. You know, personally, The Acolyte, that was huge and so many people went after it. But me personally, I quite liked it, you know? There are so many shows and movies in this franchise, and so many of them are relentlessly hated on, and I try to not be a part of the majority. But with The Rise of Skywalker in particular, I just can't get behind it. It feels The first movie was good. The second movie was about as mediocre as you can get with a film. And the last movie, I don't like it. I really don't like it. And it hurts me to say that because, like I said, I want to like Star Wars. It's my favorite thing, pretty much ever. And it's really hard when you have a series that you so badly want to like and you just can't get behind it. And I think that that's how a lot of people feel. But in the end, it's up to you. It's your choice whether you like something or you don't. If you don't like it, don't go after other people and say, you can't like this. It is objectively bad. Me personally, there's a lot of objectively bad shows that I actually really like, you know? Don't go after the actors. Don't go after the people who like it. And most importantly, if you like it, that's okay. We have a right as human beings to like whatever we want. It's a right as people, as living things, to enjoy what we want. If you don't like the sequels, that is okay, but don't go after people who do like it. That's not okay in any way, shape, or form. Anyway, I think I've probably talked too much and forgotten about some of the other points that I want to make, but this video is getting long and I don't want to have to edit another whole hour of me completely yapping. So I think the final conclusion here is let people like what they like. And if you don't like it, that's also okay. Ultimately, these movies are just movies. Personally, I like the first one. Don't really like the second one, but I would watch it. And the third one, I don't like. And that's okay. If you have a different opinion, you can voice that. But if your first instinct, when you are told that something that you dislike is good, is to go after people and send them death threats of all things, you're not a good person. At time of recording, Skeleton Crew has just dropped, and so far, no one has been hating on it. And I love to see that. It is so refreshing to finally see a Star Wars project that isn't constantly debated over. I want to keep it that way. This isn't really about the sequels anymore. This is about us as a community and Star Wars. People need to relax. It's a franchise about aliens in space and cool spaceships and cool fighting and lightsabers and blasters. It's not deep enough that you should be sending people awful, horrible comments over liking something or not liking something. We as people need to like what we like and let people do what they want, you know? They say cringe is dead. I hope it is. Because honestly, it's so silly when people decide that it's their job to ridicule people on what they can and can't like. But, you know, I can't control you. It's the internet. I'm just one of billions of faces. And, you know, that's it. That's kind of all I have to talk about. I hope you, at the very least, enjoyed my long-winded rant, and if I did miss anything, please tell me, because I think I definitely did. I've been talking for like 40 minutes straight, and my brain is a little bit frazzled. Please do like and subscribe and all that fun stuff if you did enjoy it, because it does help me know that I'm doing something right, you know. And I hope you have a good morning, afternoon, evening, night, whatever. Goodbye.